Hey everyone, welcome back to our study through the book of John. We are picking up today with a verse by verse study through John chapter 18. So last time in John chapter 17, we got this beautiful glimpse into Jesus' heart as he prayed, not just for his disciples back then, but for us too. And he prayed for our unity, our protection, and that we would know the deep love that the Father has for us. And now we step down from that holy ground right into the chaos of betrayal and arrest and denial. The scene changes quickly. It's almost like this storm is rolling in. But even here, in the middle of confusion and injustice, we are going to see Jesus stand firm in complete control, walking boldly towards the cross. So this chapter reminds us that no matter how dark things look, Jesus is never a victim. He's always the victorious King, moving forward in obedience to the Father. And as we go verse by verse, I want you to watch how Jesus chooses the cross, how Peter stumbles, and how the religious leaders resist the very light of the world standing right in front of them. So go ahead and grab your Bible and let's study John chapter 18 together. Okay, start in verses 1 through 3. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with his disciples across the brook Kidron, where there was a garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas, having produced a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, went there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Okay, so this passage begins with Jesus leading his disciples across the Kidron Valley to a garden. It was a place of prayer and fellowship that they had often visited together. So isn't it interesting that Jesus chose this familiar spot knowing Judas would bring the soldiers there? So it shows his resolve to fulfill the Father's will and not to avoid it. And then Judas, armed with the knowledge of Jesus's habits, right? He comes prepared with a band of soldiers. So the term band here could refer to a large group, even hundreds, which shows just how determined the religious leaders were to arrest him. And they bring torches and weapons as if expecting a struggle. Yet, as we will see, Jesus doesn't resist. He willingly surrenders, and he demonstrates a kind of power that doesn't rely on force. Right? Okay, so let's keep going. Verse 4. Then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, came forward and said to them, "Whom do you seek?" They answered him, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus said to them, "I am he." Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground. Okay, so here we see Jesus stepping forward with courage. He doesn't hide or wait to be found, but instead he asks, "Whom do you seek?" And the phrase "I am" here really goes back to God's name revealed to Moses back in Exodus 3:14. He says, "I am who I am." Right? So this is how Jesus referred to himself back in John 8, also, right before the Pharisees tried to stone him. We also saw Jesus describe his character in multiple I am statements throughout the book of John. He said, "I am the good shepherd. I am the door to the sheep. I am the way, the truth, and the life. And I am the light of the world." So in this moment, Jesus, again, is not just identifying himself, but revealing his divine authority. And then notice the soldiers' reaction here, right? They fall back. And this just shows the power of Jesus's words. And isn't it incredible that even those who came to arrest him were momentarily just overwhelmed by his majesty? So here we see Jesus is in complete control over the situation, right? He's not a victim of circumstance. He's willingly laying his life down. He's willingly taking the steps that he needs to take for his arrest and then his death on the cross. So that thought, that idea really challenges me to trust God's sovereignty in my own life, right? Especially when things feel chaotic and out of control. God is in control. He is sovereign. Okay, verse 7. So he asked them again, "Whom do you seek?" And they said, "Jesus of Nazareth." Jesus answered, "I told you that I am he. So if you seek me, let these men go." This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken, "Of those whom you gave me, I have lost not one." Okay, so here, even in his arrest, Jesus protects his disciples, and he ensures that they are not taken alongside him when he's arrested. And this is fulfilling his earlier promise back in John chapter 17, verse 12. It says, I have guarded them and not one of them has been lost. So this moment reveals his heart as a shepherd, right? He's always looking out for the flock, even at great cost to himself. So can you imagine the relief his disciples must have felt in this moment, even in the midst of confusion and fear? And it's also a great reminder of how Jesus protects us spiritually, right? So just as he shielded his disciples from physical harm, he also shields us from the ultimate consequences of sin and death. Okay, verse 10. Then Simon Peter, having a sword, drew it and struck the high priest's servants and cut off his right ear. So the servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, put your sword into the sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me? Okay, so Peter's boldness here is so relatable, isn't it? So he's trying to defend Jesus, but he's acting out of impulse rather than faith. So cutting off the ear was likely meant as a defensive strike, but Jesus rebukes him. Why? Because Jesus knows that this isn't a time for violence. It's a time for submission to the Father's will. So when he says the word cup, shall I not drink the cup that my Father has given me? He's referring to the suffering he's about to endure. So this was a reference that was often used in Scripture for God's judgment, this cup. So Jesus is fully committed to drinking this cup because it's the only way to bring salvation to the world. Okay, verse 12. So the band of soldiers and their captain and the officers of the Jews arrested Jesus and bound him. First they led him to Annas. He was a father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people. Okay, so after his peaceful surrender, Jesus is bound and taken first to Annas. So Annas, though he's no longer the acting high priest, he's still wielded significant influence as the patriarch of a priestly family. So it's no coincidence that John reminds us of Caiaphas's earlier statement that we saw back in John chapter 11. He said, it is better for you that one man should die for the people. So Caiaphas had spoken more truth in that moment than he understood. He was prophesying about the death of Jesus. Okay, verse 15. Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. But Peter stood outside at the door. So the other disciple, who was known to the high priest, went out and spoke to the servant girl who kept watch at the door and brought Peter in. The servant girl at the door said to Peter, you also are not one of the man's disciples, are you? And he said, I am not. Now the servants and officers had made a charcoal fire because it was cold, and they were standing and warming themselves. Peter also was with them, standing and warming himself. Okay, so Peter, who had just boldly defended Jesus with a sword, now hesitates. Right? And isn't that so human? Right? Can't we relate to that so much? So fear overtakes him, and he denies being a disciple when questioned by a servant girl. So the shift from bravery to fear reminds me of how easily we can falter in our faith when faced with pressure, right? Okay, and then the mention of the charcoal fire is a very subtle but meaningful detail. So later on in John chapter 21, we see that Jesus will restore Peter by another charcoal fire. And I love this connection because it shows how God's grace redeems our failures. Okay, verse 19. This is going to be verse 19 through 24. Okay, the high priest then questioned Jesus about his disciples and his teaching. Jesus answered him, I have spoken openly to the world. I have always taught in synagogues and in the temple where all Jews come together. I have said nothing in secret. Why do you ask me? Ask those who heard me what I said to them. They know what I said. When he said these things, one of the officers standing by struck Jesus with his hand, saying, is this how you answer the high priest? Jesus answered him, if what I said is wrong, bear witness about the wrong. But if what I said is right, why do you strike me? Annas then sent him to be bound to Caiaphas, the high priest. Okay, so Jesus is questioned about his teachings, but he boldly asserts that everything he taught has been public and transparent. He's not hiding anything. And his words stand as a testimony to the truth. So the officer striking Jesus reveals, just one of the many things that reveals the injustice of this trial. It's a mockery of fairness. However, I'm moved by how Jesus doesn't retaliate, but he calmly responds with logic and truth, right? So his composure under such unjust treatment is an example of how we can also respond to opposition with grace and integrity, right? Back in Isaiah 53:7, it's a prophecy that said, he was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. So Jesus' quiet strength here fulfills prophecy spoken back by Isaiah and sets an example for us to follow, right? When we face unjust treatment. Again, we can know that God is sovereign in it, and he is ultimately in control. We can trust him. Okay, verse 25 through 27. Now Simon Peter was standing and warming himself. So they said to him, you also are not one of his disciples, are you? He denied it and said, I am not. One of the servants of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, asked, did I not see you in the garden with him? Peter again denied it, and at once the rooster crowed. Okay, so here we see Peter's second and third denials, just as Jesus foretold back in John 13, verse 38. So Peter's fear overcomes him again, and he denies knowing Jesus. So this part of the story, it always breaks my heart because I can see myself so much in Peter, right? How often do we falter in moments when we should be standing firm? And yet Peter's story doesn't end here. Okay, we have to remember that later on, Jesus is going to restore him. So our failures, it's a great reminder, our failures do not have to define us. Okay, verse 28. Then they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. So Pilate went out to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? They answered him, if this man were not doing evil, we would not have delivered him over to you. Pilate said to them, take him yourselves and judge him by your own law. The Jews said to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. This was to fulfill the word that Jesus has spoken, to show by what kind of death he was going to die. Okay, here we see even more of the hypocrisy of the Jewish leaders, right? They refused to enter Pilate's headquarters to avoid ceremonial defilement, all while conspiring to have an innocent man executed. So their focus on outward religious purity blinds them to the injustice they're committing. And then Pilate's initial reluctance to engage shows his discomfort with the situation, right? But the Jewish leaders press forward, insisting on Jesus's execution. So their inability to carry out capital punishment under Roman law sets the stage for Jesus's crucifixion, exactly as he foretold. So in John 12:32 through 33, he spoke of being lifted up to draw all people to himself. So even in this moment of injustice, God's sovereign plan is unfolding perfectly. Okay, verse 33. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered, do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me? Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done? Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting that I may not be delivered over to the Jews. But my kingdom is not of this world. Then Pilate said to him, so you are a king? Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And Pilate said to him, what is truth? So this conversation between Jesus and Pilate is one of the most profound exchanges in Scripture, right? So Pilate, a Roman governor, struggles to understand Jesus's kingship. And Jesus makes it clear that his kingdom is not of this world. It is not about political power or military force, but it's about spiritual truth and spiritual redemption. So Jesus' statement about his purpose to bear witness to the truth. This is why he came into the world, to bear witness to the truth. It pierces through all the noise of this unjust trial, right? He came to reveal God's truth to the world and to invite people into his kingdom. And then response here, what is truth? Reflects the skepticism of someone who has likely seen too much political corruption to believe in absolutes. For me, this passage, it really challenges me whether I'm listening to Jesus's voice, the voice of truth. Am I seeking his kingdom above all other earthly concerns? Okay, verse 38. After he said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, I find no guilt in him, but you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? And they cried out again, not this man, but Barabbas. And Barabbas was a robber. Okay, so Pilate declares Jesus innocent. Yet he tries to appease to the crowd by offering to release him as part of a Passover custom. And the crowd, influenced by the religious leaders, chooses Barabbas. He was a known criminal, so they choose him over Jesus. And this exchange shows the depth of humanity's rejection of Christ. So Barabbas, whose name means son of the Father, is released, while the true son of the Father is condemned. So this substitution reflects the heart of the gospel, right? So Jesus takes the place of the guilty. He's offering his own life so that a sinner might go free. So when I think about this, it reminds me of a verse in Romans 5, verse 8. It says, but God shows his love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And like Barabbas, we don't deserve this kind of grace, but Jesus gives it freely, gives it to us freely. So John 18 paints a vivid picture of Jesus's faithfulness and courage as he walks the path to the cross. Every detail, his peaceful surrender, his bold declaration of truth, his calm under unjust treatment, reveals his complete trust in the Father's plan. For me, this chapter is a call to reflect on my own responses to fear and opposition and injustice, right? Am I trusting God's sovereignty as Jesus did? Am I listening to his voice of truth even when it's hard? Am I living in gratitude for the incredible exchange that he made on my behalf? And how about you? How does this chapter speak to your heart today? I would love to hear it. Leave me a comment below. Let me know. Also, make sure that you check out the description for links to more resources and a link to our online Facebook group and the Patreon where you can find more exclusive content. So I'll see you over there and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.